Good evening, everyone. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening and welcome to the embassy. Before we start, please take a few moments to switch off your mobile phone. I see confirmation, so we'll proceed. And we are honored to have the presence of His Excellency Ambassador Arun Singh along with us for this evening. We are very pleased to present this special event under our Understanding India series. Even though we have done a few events under the Understanding India series, I think this event is special. So we thought that we will just touch upon a very similar event we did, but how this differs from that. We presented a speech by Professor Robert D. Carelli from George Mason University, and he spoke about envisioning the Buddha, the development of Buddha's images in the early South Asia. So he spoke about how the Buddha's image was developed as a sculpture, as an image, and he traced it over about 600, 700 years. That was very interesting. And you would have listened to some of the historians speak about the result of their research. Actually, Professor Dehejia now, she is giving a series of lectures at the National Art Gallery in which she is actually presenting the result of her work. She is talking about the bronze images of South Asia, and she has chosen a wonderful Tamil title called Ullam Kavar Kalvan in English. It's a thief of my heart. But here, the speciality is that she is going to talk about her research work, not the result of her research work. In this way, we don't really get to listen to a lot of historians talking about what is their work is. And every profession will have very interesting answers. And I'm sure Ambassador will agree with me. One of the questions I dread is, as a diplomat, what you do? And it's not a very simple answer, and it's not a very direct answer to give. And in this way, probably historians, every historian has their own unique story. And Professor Dehejia has accepted to give us that story. Just to alert you that recently Washington Post described her as a speaker with 3 words. It said she's entertaining, knowledgeable, and effective. And before the 3rd word, they have put a word, very effective. With that, I welcome all of you for this evening, and to take the proceedings further and to introduce the speaker, let me welcome Divya Kapoor. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Divya Kapoor, and it's completely my honor to be the MC for today's evening's event. I welcome you all as our distinguished guests this evening. And today, in continuation with the Understanding India series of cultural events, the Embassy is presenting a talk titled In Pursuit of Gods and Goddesses, Tales of Fieldwork Chasing Temples and Images by Padma Bhushan awardee Professor Vidya Dehejia. I'm sure you've already gone through Professor Dehejia's full-length bio, which was incorporated in the Embassy's invitation for this event. So I'm going to give you a very brief introduction. Professor Dr. Vidya Dehejia is the Barbara Stoller Miller Professor of Indian Art at Columbia University, where she has taught since 1982. She holds a BA, an MA, and a PhD from Cambridge University, and a BA from St. Xavier's College, Mumbai University. She's the author of many books, 25, and catalogues and essays and topics in the cultural and intellectual history of India. Professor Dehejia served as the director for the Southern Asian Institute at Columbia University from 2003 to 2008. From 1994 to 2002, she served at the Freer Gallery of Art and at the Arthur M. Sackler Gallery in Washington, D.C. Before that, she was on the faculty at the School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi. Professor Dehejia has received several awards and honors, including the Padma Bhushan, awarded by the President of India for her exceptional contributions to art and education in 2012, a National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowship, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and other awards. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Dehejia for our lecture today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sridharan and Divya. And Mr. Ambassador, it really is a pleasure that you took the time off to come this evening. I appreciate that very much. So, since I'm giving a whole series of 6 lectures at the National Gallery, it made total sense to me to suggest or receive the suggestion from the embassy that I talk about the actual process of research. Let me start with leaving India and St. Xavier's College when I was 19 years old and going off to Cambridge in England. I decided I wanted to study archaeology. I really thought that what I was made for was to dig into the ground and find all these riches and wealth underground and follow that type of a career. Having finished my degree there, I talked to a lot of people who were archaeologists. Sir Mortimer Wheeler is one of those big names in archaeology, and he was actually one of the people I went to see in London about doing archaeology. And he said, yes, yes, of course you must be an archaeologist. I went to Pune, which is where I would have liked to work with Dr. Sankalia, who was a great archaeologist in India. I walked into his office, told him what I wanted to do. He looked at me and he said, my God, he said, if you start coming to excavations, I'll have to take my wife with me everywhere because you'll be the only woman in the entire room. I thought about it, and I decided after some time that no, it was not archaeology proper that I wanted to pursue, but that I'd be very much happier looking at art that was already produced, which was either Buddhist monasteries or temples or bronze images or manuscripts, and I decided to shift to the history of art. And in order to do that, I decided to do a PhD at Cambridge, which was to be on the caves of Western India. These are these Buddhist monasteries cut into the hills and valleys of the Western Ghats all the way down the coast of India. And it was very difficult to travel in those days. Roads as such, nowadays there are roads to go almost anywhere, but of course with caves they're at least halfway up a hill, so you always have to climb halfway up a hill to get there. So here's my first problem. You can see where the caves are. I knew where the caves were. When you get to the bottom of the hill, they vanish. And you have no idea of what is the path to get up to them? What is the footpath to get up to some of these caves? I visited a few and went back and was complaining to my mother that the villagers were not being very helpful. I was dressed in pants and a shirt. And my mother said to me, have you thought of wearing a sari? And I said, wear a sari to climb halfway up a hill? And she said, yes, of course. We all wear saris and we do all our work. Why not climb up a hill? Just because you went to England and came back. So I tried it. And I have to tell you, I'm very adept now at wearing a sari in any situation. But I have to tell you, it made an enormous difference. When you get to a village, you know there are caves there. You need the local villager or the local shepherd boy who's got all his goats all over the hillside. You need that person to take you up to show you how to get to a place. And I very often had to stay overnight in these places. So I would go and talk with the village headman, and the village headman would say, okay, I had a very small fold-up mattress, nice, neat little thing with a blow-up pillow. And the village headman would say, okay, here is the schoolroom hut. Nothing different about a schoolroom hut except that there was a blackboard in many cases on the wall. This is where you can sleep at night. And please come to my home this evening. And I would go there, and they had so little, but they needed to give me some of that. And usually it was a glass of milk, hot milk, very sweet hot milk, and a banana, something like that. These were really small villages near Kura and Mahad, Murad Janjira, these sorts of places where there were no rest houses. There was nothing of the sort. And if you wanted to study a cave site like this, which is extensive, you need to stay close by and keep returning to the spot. So that was my first introduction to the idea of always wearing a sari, which I began to do. And the resulting book, which was my doctoral dissertation, was published by Thames and Hudson. Another very similar experience was one of Orissa. In Orissa, I largely traveled by train. And in many places, I would get to, we had these records, the archaeological survey records, which would say that the nearest spot is such and such. The records I'm talking about are not modern records. They're really sort of the 1890s, 1910 type of records. And so I was following those, and I would get to a particular station and get off there. And I knew that the caves and the Buddhist monasteries were somewhere in that region. But again, you need the local help. And one of many episodes that I might relate to you, getting to a small railway station. The station master was quite alarmed. I was on my own. I had a small amount of baggage. And I told him what I wanted to do. He said, fine, I'll get you an eka, so one of these horse-drawn little carts. So he arranged for one and told the guy, take her to this place and bring her back. I spent a wonderful day. Very clearly, I needed to be there for at least another day, maybe 2 days more. I get back to the station. Station master is looking up the next train that you can take to Bhubaneswar is such and such in another hour and a half. And I had to tell him, I'm sorry. I'm not going to be able to take that. I need to stay here because I need to go back tomorrow, and I probably need to go back the day after. This absolutely alarmed him, but I told him that I would be perfectly okay in the station waiting room. So I occupied the ladies' waiting room. He told me to lock myself in, that he would be there first thing in the morning to check on me. I went off the second day. He looked at me when I came back and said, you're getting on that train, aren't you? And I said, no, I'm afraid not. I'm going to have to stay here a little longer. There were occasions on which one of the things one is very susceptible to, or I was very susceptible to, was insect bites of one sort or another. And coming, and in so many places you have to be barefoot. I would return to Delhi, which was base for me then, and I had a dermatologist. He was not dependent on me, but I was dependent on him. And the dermatologist had his office down a few steps. So instead of a barsati, it was an underground one. And he would watch me coming down the steps, and he'd say, okay, what is it this time that you have contracted? And one of the most painful ones I contracted was something right on my lip. I got a huge blister, and it became larger and larger. And the people who were in that village said, you've got to get to a bus stop and then get on a bus and go to a hospital. And when I got to the hospital, the doctor took one look at me and said, yes, spider's lick. A spider has been crawling over your face at night and you've not been aware of it. And that's what happens when it leaves its saliva on you. extraordinarily fun, interesting, and in Orissa, the village in which I was staying would share what they had. It's still a very poor area, particularly Ganjam district and south. And so what did they have? They had rotis, chapatis, thick chapati, and green chilies. That's all they had, and that's what they would share with me. And after about a week of living on sort of cheese and biscuits, which had all by now gone limp, I was very glad to eat these thick rotis and chilies. But the villagers are really extraordinarily warm, friendly. And yes, you are from the town, but you have come to mingle with them and to look at their monuments, and they really do welcome you. In Orissa, I worked on a project on the Yogini temples. You see on the left the publication which was published by the National Museum in New Delhi. And these Yogini temples are extraordinarily strange things. You can probably see that it's a circle open to the sky. There's no roof. There's hardly a gateway into it. It's just a sort of an entranceway. And on the interior walls, you've got these Chaunsat yoginis, they call them, 64 yoginis, these goddesses. This particular one that you're looking at is in interior Orissa, 300 miles from Bhubaneswar. Orissa is a huge state. I don't know how many of you know it, but you can pick up England, Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and put it into the state of Orissa, and you'd still have space around it. So it's a huge state. So 300 miles interior by 3-tier sleeper, which was the only thing that went into such remote areas. But I got there. But my quest of yoginis and yogini temples took me to a number of places in UP, in Uttar Pradesh, which really were dacoit-infested areas at that time. So I think many of you probably know all about the dacoits, and maybe some of you have even seen the movie called Bandit Queen. But these are people you don't really want to run across. And I was determined that I was going to find 2 temples, 3 actually, that had last been reported in the 1890s, and they were not, I wasn't even sure they were actually yogini temples. All that Alexander Cunningham, who was one of those reports, all that he said was that there are an awful lot of female images in this spot. Now, anywhere I heard about female images when I was working on yoginis, I was off. Lot of wild goose chases. But occasionally, it yielded information of real importance. So I was at this site called Naresar. This is dacoit-infested land. And my father was in the police. He was the IG of police in one of the states. He rang up his counterpart and said, my daughter insists on going into these temples. Will you please make sure she's okay? So I was met at the station by police. I went off first to this one site that I wanted to visit. I had 2 people on either side of me, 2 policemen with 9-bore guns. These are huge, tall, big things. And I had the driver of the jeep, police jeep, behind me, and the archaeological survey local person in front of me. We must have made a very strange group. And when I protested to the police at the mess, the police officers, they said, look, we know that the dacoits are not interested in you. They target the people. They know who has the money. They will kidnap somebody whom they'll be sure that they're going to get their ransom. They're not going to be interested in you, but you may just run across them by chance. And if you do, they can't leave you, they'll take you. And if they take you, I'll have to spend months of my time searching for you. So it's much better that you take these police and go along. And this was one of the sites where the site, I don't have a dramatic view, but what happens is you walk all the way, it's like walking to this end, and then there's a waterfall. And what you don't realize is if you walk around and go inside underneath the waterfall, there are a whole lot of temples, including a yogini temple. And once we got there, the police said, oh my, we often find fires having been lit and food having been cooked. There's firewood. So this is, in fact, an overnight halt for dacoits if they are kidnapping from this region as opposed to some other region. Another of the interesting episodes another yogini temple that I was searching for at a place called Dudahi. And this was an interesting one. The police officer said to me, we'll go together, I'll come with you, but first I have a murder case to investigate. I've got to do that, so we'll spend part of our time. So we went to a particular spot, he finished his case, and then we started in search of my yogini temple. Now, it was Alexander Cunningham's report. Here is the interior, all the images are missing. I had Cunningham's report, and so we were driving down into a valley. So the police jeep was meandering its way all the way down, and when we got to the bottom, there was this village which was totally empty, totally deserted. It looked like maybe a movie set that had been abandoned. Nobody. The police said, shall we stop? And I said, no. Our instructions are very clear. Alexander Cunningham, he was on horseback, but he left very clear instructions of how you get to places. And it says, after you go down and you pass the village, then there's a small mound, and if you go there, you'll see the temple. So we continued on our way. Saw a young man, teenager, in the field, and we picked him up and said, look, I believe there's a hill and there's a temple. Do you know it? And he knew it. So he came with us and showed us. And then he left us and went back. When I finished dealing with these imageless temple, we went back to the village. The whole village had come to life. There were people with tea, with mithais of various sorts, everything. And they said to us, oh, we saw you people coming down. But the dacoits drive jeeps just like that. They also wear khaki, just like the police. So we all hid inside, barricaded our doors, and hid inside the village. Then we watched you. We watched you pick up this young boy. We were worried for him, but we kept watching. And we finally saw you getting out of the jeep. And then they said, but then there was a woman who was leading the way. And so we got worried again and said, is this Hasina and her group of dacoits, perhaps? And finally, it was when the boy came back to the village that he enlightened them on the fact that, no, it's just some crazy woman looking for a temple, and they're really police, and it's okay. And so everything sort of came to life over that. Lots of interesting, one more yogini temple story. At a site called Lokari. Again, this is in the Banda district. And I was looking for a small hill. Difficult to find because it's very flat in that area, and there didn't seem to be any. But anyway, I got to this temple. At the base of the hill was a small school hut. And the local people came and said, you've got to come and see the school hut of ours. And I said, yes, let me go up the hill first. Let me look for the temple, and then when I come down, I'd love to see your school hut. So we went up to the temple, and there were the most extraordinary set of yogini images. Almost all of them had animal heads of one sort or another, female bodies, but animal heads. And here, of course, you can remember this ram-headed and the goat-headed yogini. When we came down, and there were not 64, they're supposed to be 64, there might have been about 48 of them or so that I counted and photographed every one of them. I'm going ahead of myself, but when we came down to look at the school hut, I said, that's wonderful. How did you get the money to build this little school hut? And they said, some people came in a truck, and they said, can we take 3 or 4 of your images and we'll build you a school hut in exchange? And they said, they built us the hut, and they took the images. Since I photographed these, something similar has happened again, because there are less and less yoginis, and these two turned up in auction. So here is the Sotheby's auction catalog of the figure that I had photographed in situ. So you have the image, and it's been cleaned up a little bit, but it's in the Sotheby's auction catalog. Sotheby's was alerted to the fact that it is being photographed in situ well after the year 72, which is the cutoff date for the UNESCO convention, so you cannot sell it, so they withdrew it from the sale. The companion piece, this is the goat-headed, the ram-headed yogini was also missing. And she turned up when a European collector volunteered to the government of India that he, in fact, had this piece. And so the National Museum in 2013, very much later, featured the exhibition called The Return of the Yogini, just a single piece exhibition with a conference around it. So having photographs of objects in situ really, in a way, helps enormously to get things back. Today, I want to show you two absolutely stunning images in my photograph of a long time ago, one with a rabbit head, one with a snake head. And today there's a very sad story. I don't know the details of the story, but of the rabbit-headed yogini, that is all that's left. It is the exact image, and of the snake-headed yogini, that's all that's left. I don't know who was responsible for the vandalism, how it happened, but there's no longer anything at that site, which is very, very sad indeed. Quickly, to move to another of my projects, which was on the saints in South India. And I show you just one image of one saint who's known as Karekal Ammayar. She's the mother of Karekal. There's a bizarre story. She requests Shiva to take away the weight of her body so that she could always watch him dancing and always sing his praise with cymbals in her hand. And this is the miracle that's supposed to have happened. A beautiful young woman becomes this emaciated sort of form. The interesting thing about her is that anywhere that Indian culture went, it seems that Karekal Ammayar went too, because the image that you're seeing on the top right is from Sri Lanka. Very effective, and you can see how close it is to the image in India proper. So it suggests to me that somebody who knew this image actually was responsible for that particular bronze. Even more exciting was to find her in Cambodia, where she occurs prior to the date on which she occurs in India. Extraordinary. And you can see that there's a dancing Shiva there, and on the pedestal, the base of that is the image that you see in detail on the left. How did she get to Cambodia? How did she become a figure there? Her own story talks about her husband, who was a trader, this woman displays a whole lot of sort of divine qualities, and the husband says, I can worship you, but I cannot live with you as your husband. And he sails away, it says in the Tamil text, to a distant place. And so one can raise the issue, was that distant place actually Cambodia? Quickly to another project, which was both a book and an exhibition on silver for the Raj. These were Indian artists who were working, producing objects for British use during the British period. So tea services like this in every part of India was produced. There were claret jugs of this type. The British in India were the buyers of this sort of material. And when the Prince of Wales came to India, 1875-76 visit of the Prince of Wales, who was later Edward VII, he was given by both the Gaikwad of Baroda and by the Maharaja of Travancore South Indian workmanship, which was called Swami silver, because it's all gods that are on the exterior of this. I was really keen on finding out what happened to the tea services, the two which were described in great detail, and a complete canteen of forks and knives and fish forks and fish knives and the whole sort of series that were given to the Prince of Wales at that time. So I negotiated with the curator at Buckingham Palace, and he said, okay, and we made an appointment, and he took me in, and he said, well, he said, in the meantime, he said, I've checked out, but the Queen herself is not using them. I said, all right. So where is it? We were taken into this room which had all these gifts of various types, but I never found those two silver tea sets in the Swami silver. And then the curator turns to me and says, you know, it's most likely that it's in one of the ex-colonies. So I said, yes. And what do you mean by ex-colonies? And he said, Canada or Australia. He's calling them, it's very interesting use of terminology in that case. I didn't ever find them. And totally, I'm going to skip this in interest of time. This is a work that I did on the unfinished, but I want to move to my current work, which is this series of lectures on Chola bronzes that I titled The Thief Who Stole My Heart. And if you wonder why the title, they are, of course, absolutely gorgeous images, beautiful images, and you can look at the rear view of this one. But why The Thief Who Stole My Heart? There are these saints in South India that I've already mentioned. And three of the saints who are more famous than the rest wrote 700 hymns. And this is the sort of the canon that's recited in the temples in South India. It's not the Vedas, it's not Sanskrit. There are, of course, some Sanskrit mantras, but the songs that are sung are the songs of the saints. And the very first hymn of this entire canon, which is called the Tevaram, the very first hymn and the very first verse describes Shiva as the thief who stole my heart. This is this beautiful, beautiful person. It's a verse that a lot of people know. I know that Mr. Sridharan right out here, who wrote me the Tamil words when I sent him the title saying the thief who stole my heart. And here's how it sounds. I'm Tamilian myself, which is probably one reason an Iyer Brahmin. Todudaya Sheviyan Vidayeri Ortu Venmadi Shuri Kadudaya Shudalai Pudi Pushi Yen Ullam Kavar Kalvan. Yen Ullam Kavar Kalvan is the phrase, the thief who stole my heart. And I decided that these absolutely exquisite images merited my lifting that phrase and using it as my series title for this. There's always been a bit of a problem because we say that so many of our images have gone overseas. But I can assure you, yes, there are more than we would like, maybe 35, 40 Natarajas, but I can assure you that the best of the images are still in the temples of India. And also, you can look at these absolutely exquisite images of Shiva and Uma. And yes, these are in a museum, though in a museum in India, in the Tanjavur Art Gallery, but they are equally beautiful images that are still in worship in the temples themselves. So while we think that there's been a lot of fuss about smuggling, and yes, it's very regrettable, but it has been exaggerated. It's not that many that have gone overseas. The best of them are still in situ. So I needed to see these images. And my negotiations were always with the temple priests. And they have total power. And my great-grandfather was a temple priest in a little town called Lalgudi, the Saptarishishwara temple there. So I sort of knew that there are no actual rules laid down anywhere about whether people can see bronzes, whether you can remove the drapery, whether you can photograph them. It's entirely up to the priests and the trustees of a particular temple. And I'll give you a couple of interesting episodes before I stop. For some reason, apparently, I don't look Tamil. Which meant that I would go into temples and there would be priests who are, when there's no puja, they're lounging around in the hall in front. And they would watch me come and they would start speaking about me in Tamil. For some reason, they never thought that I was Tamilian myself. So if they started doing that, I usually knew that I had the upper hand here. And so I would walk around the temple, look at the bronzes I wanted to look at, and then by the time I came around, and then they would say, look, she's here again. What is she doing? She's got a camera, she's got a pencil and pen. And usually they'd make some other remark that they may not have made if they knew I understood Tamil. Like, for heaven's sake, if she put oil in her hair and some flowers, she might actually be good looking. So once that happened, I knew I had them. I could now say, Vakamalia. I could turn to them and say, aren't you ashamed of talking about a woman? Not that they ever said anything utterly outrageous, but by that time they were so chagrined that I had understood that they felt they had to sort of humor me and allow me. But sometimes, like in this case, I might get them to remove the drapery and actually be able to photograph something. As they all said, the rule is only that you can't photograph the sanctum image. It does not apply to other images. On other occasions, this is an interesting story. This is, of course, a Vishnu and Bhudevi and Sri Devi in a museum. It's the LACMA piece in the Los Angeles County Museum. But in one temple that I negotiated with, the priest said, okay, very grudgingly. He said, 5 o'clock in the morning, I'll do the wake-up Tirupalli. I'll finish the wake-up song and all of that, and then I'll be undressing and redressing the images. And if you come at 5 o'clock in the morning, you can come there. Your eyes, yes. Camera's eyes, no. So I said, okay, I'll leave my camera aside and just come. And so, you see, I had an inkling that in that temple they were actually Chola bronzes, that they weren't later, but they were so heavily dressed that I couldn't really see enough. So the priest first does Sri Devi, takes off all the clothes, the old clothes of the day, the faded garlands, puts on new, then he does Bhudevi, and then he says, okay, now you can go. And I said, what do you mean? What about the Vishnu? And he was outraged that as a woman, I had asked to see the god. And I said, they're all dressed. I'm not asking to see them nude. But he just would not budge. So that was one of those cases in which I simply had to just abandon the idea of seeing the Vishnu image. But, last image and last comment. Yes, these are all sacred images, and they are very, very important in the temple as sacred images. But I think today we have to accept the fact that they are works of art as well. They were always works of art. I mean, the artist who is creating these images has to create the perfect receptacle in which the priest will invoke the deity to come and inhabit it for a short period of time during the time of the puja. There's the invitation to come down, and then the okay, God, you may now leave. And when it's not been invoked, it really isn't sacred and isn't treated that way by the priests themselves. I mean, I've watched priests cleaning images where they're treating, they've got this palm olive It's called Bundi Kotte in Tamil. And they are rubbing it over the images. They're the breasts of Uma, everything. They don't have, it's not God then. It hasn't got the streak of the divine. So when we see these images in museums, I think we might remind ourselves that the spark of divinity has not been invoked to come into this. When it isn't, the priests turn their back to it. They do anything at all within the, they're not disrespectful, but they don't treat it as God. And so I think it's sort of useful to remember that it's when it's invoked and is dressed, adorned, and carried in procession, the priest has invoked the deity to come. Any other time, it is a beautiful work of art, and it is in museums around the world. And I think we can also glory in that, in the sacred aspect, but also in the fact that they are wonderful works of art. Thank you.
Professor has kindly agreed to take a few questions. Please identify yourself, ask the questions briefly, and only one question per person. And there are our colleagues who will pass on the mics to you. Please wait for the mic. Thank you. You can choose, you can play.
Yes, I can see two hands, so one after the other. The two.
Good evening. My name is Chetna. A lovely presentation, and I'm so glad I came. I have many, many questions, but I'll limit myself. One is, how old are the temples that you spoke about in Orissa? Sorry.
They're probably 9th century, so around 800, around that period.
And at this point, is it now accessible to your average tourist?
Yes, it's very much more. The trains, the roads that have been built, except that, of course, locally, there's nothing to see anymore. We don't know where the images are. Somebody said to me it's gone to Gadwa Fort, which is in that Manda district, but I haven't been back. I was so distressed when I saw the pictures that I lost any enthusiasm to go and check it out.
Thank you. Is this working?
Sort of.
I have a personal question. Based on your work, your entire life, this is just splendid pieces of art that you've been involved with. Are you religious also?
I know everything that I have to do in a temple in Tamil Nadu. So I can't, I know what is appropriate, so I'll go and do that usually first. You do need, again, the priests to help you out. If they're not going to allow you to get there. So I very often go and say, okay, let's do an Ashtottaram. Let's do that. Let's finish that first, and then go around. No, I'm not deeply religious.
Thank you.
My name is Sudarshan Paul Dev. Professor Dehejia, thank you very much for your courage as a young woman traveling through the forests of India to preserve that heritage for us. So I admire you for that, and thank you for that. My question is, have you wondered about the relative occurrence of temples in South India versus North India, and correlating that with the population densities? Did you expect many more temples in the north and not find them, or you found enough?
The north, there are two reasons. I mean, there are wide swaths of Madhya Pradesh, and if you drive from wherever, Jhansi to Khajuraho, inhospitable sort of surroundings. It's sort of scrub forest, and settlements, towns, villages, even today, are very far apart, one from the other. In Tamil Nadu, it's such a rich, lush agricultural land of paddy fields that there's a village. I mean, now it's almost like one village ends, you don't even realize that it's ended and another one has started. So there are villages every 2 to 3 miles, and every village has its own temple, or every town has its own temple. So in a way, it's also partly, there are many more in South India, many reasons for that. One of them also being that in the north, anybody who came into India, including the Muslims, came via all that route where after a certain period, temples did not continue to be built so much. I mean, of course, then you come right into the 20th century and you have Birla Mandirs and all the other ones, but there is a bit of a hiatus. And therefore, in a way, you do find many more temples in South India. There is an institution in South India called the HRNCE. Don't really have to know. It's Hindu Religious and Charitable Endowments. And they have sole control over temples in Tamil Nadu. Archaeological survey doesn't count. 41,000 temples under their control, including modern ones, but 41,000 in just Tamil Nadu.
Yeah. Hi, Professor. Thanks for your comments. Dave Ramaswamy here. You know, the Chola Empire lasted from 300 BC to the 13th century, almost 1,500 years. Very few people in India know this. And Rajendra Chola in 1025 launched a naval armada to conquer what is current-day Sumatra and Java, the Srivijaya Empire. So in your experience, I mean, that was the biggest naval fleet assembled till Philip II, 700 years later. So they were a naval power, and of course they spread Indian art and antiquities in the greater Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia. So in your experience, what has been your research work in the Chola antiquities in Southeast Asia? Thank you.
The only area where there are actual Chola antiquities is in Sri Lanka. These 6 lectures that I'm giving at the National Gallery, next week's lecture is called The Chola Obsession with Sri Lanka and the Silk Route of the Sea in the 11th and 12th centuries. So perhaps you might be interested in that particular one, which deals very much with Southeast Asia, and particularly the fact that from really olden times, you've got Aden at one end, you've got China at one end, and then right in the middle is India, Sri Lanka, and then a little bit to the side, Sumatra. And the ships, the Chinese ships are coming to these ports. The Arab ships are coming to the same ports. They interchange, they change goods, they reload, they offload and reload and go back. So the Chola thrust into Sri Lanka is primarily for trading rights and trading purposes and not to occupy. And it's much before the Chola period that Hinduism and Buddhism both travel to all of Southeast Asia. And it then develops in its own way in each of those areas. You can never mistake a Javanese say Ganesha with a Vietnamese Ganesha or with a Cambodian Ganesha. And that's because the culture got there early, and then each of these various nations developed it in their own way.
My name is Ajay Kothari. I would like to just first say that I think Washington Post should have used the word very in front of 2 other words.
Thank you.
And also effective, very effective. Fantastic. I was wondering, there is a place called Chandravati in Rajasthan, sort of south near Mount Abu. About 900,000 to 1100 AD, the town was destroyed. But it had like 1,000 temples there. And there is a rumor that there are caves nearby which have not as much as a Ajanta, but some nice, very nice paintings done probably by Buddhist or Jain probably people, some sadhus who used to live there. I went there and tried to figure out how to find those caves or something like that, but I couldn't. And I was just wondering if you have any kind of a pointer as to how to do something like that.
It's a tough one. Usually if the local people decide that they're going to help you for whatever reason, that's almost the only way. If it's a registered archaeological site, then the archaeological survey will be able to lead you and give you directions. But if it's not a registered site, and the lockery with the rabbit-headed and snake-headed yoginis was not a registered site. So in that case, it totally depends on the whims of the local village and how much time you spend talking with them, or how much time you spend drinking little cups of tea which have more sugar in them than milk and tea. And you sort of get them to accept you, and then they help you. That's what I've found. But who has the time for that, unless you're a full-time researcher like me?
My name is Sant Gupta. You are associated with Columbia and go to India a lot. Is there a great deal of interest in India to discover itself, or among Indians? Is there enough funding? Is this something that people are proud to uncover and discover in India, this level of research? Or is it all being, my impression has been that a lot of, especially Americans and also Europeans, are doing all this research, including Indians from India. My question is, what's going on in India with Indians?
Unfortunately, what the question you're asking is there's very little, I think. In India, we tend to take our heritage very much for granted. It's right there. We can go anytime. It's like, I lived 8 years in DC and I never went to the White House, and I finally went there this afternoon. You take things for granted when they're that close to you. And you're also right in saying it is undervalued. I understand completely that we need to give higher priority to job creations and economics and fields of that sort. But we are going to be up there. We really are. And by the time we get up there, which won't be that far away, we might have lost a lot of our heritage by sheer neglect. But that's the circumstances of the nation, and I wouldn't know what to say about it. I'm not sure that the ambassador might like to answer that one. Don't want to put you on the spot. It's a tough one.
Pradeep Kapoor, just one point which I thought I'd make. You have made a very beautiful presentation, Dr. Vidya, for which I will congratulate you. It's outstanding. Now, if we just transport ourselves back in time, 1,000 years, maybe 1,000 years plus minus that way, we see that the influence of India in a large number of countries all over the world was very profound, very significant. Large number of countries followed the same traditions, the same customs, the same religious practices. Now, this is, in a way, an example of soft power diplomacy. Is there any other example of any other country wielding so much influence in this aspect, in similar aspects, in any other instances that you have come across?
I think you're right. India has had a really unique position in that sort of way. You can talk about a lot of cultures, but they haven't. Well, you can always talk about the art of Gandhara, where Greco-Roman influences are seen, but it's a very discrete little body of material. Those were the days. And I don't like to say that, but as I keep saying, those days are going to come again, I think. But you're...
Yeah, please.
Professor Dehejia, I'm really interested in understanding your interpretation of the concept of sacrality and sacredness as you have internalized and absorbed it in the course of your extensive research, and how would you connect and relate it to your apparently immense historical imagination? Thank you.
I'm not sure I got what you were asking, whether my concept of the sacred and sacrality, how do I relate that to the historical?
To your own historical imagination, as well as, of course, sacrality broadly as a concept is something that all of us have explored or understand and perceive it in our own different ways. but as an individual researcher, how have you internalized and understood and interpreted the concept of sacredness?
My attempt has always been to get into the period concerned and see from what sort of archival material, whether they're inscriptions or they're poems or they're literary texts, what the people of that time sort of made of it. Trying not to bring myself to the fore, except at least as far as sacrality is concerned, because this is a very, very tricky and very important issue. I don't need to agree with the yogini cult and the sort of cultic practices, but I can still bring them out and present them in the most sympathetic way in which they would have been understood by practitioners. So I think there is the practitioner's point of view, which I try to understand because that's what makes that particular body of material meaningful. So try now.
I'm Vijay Kumar and Tara. So I had time to travel quite a bit. Recently, in the past 2 or 3 years, I've looked at a lot of bronzes. So what is the earliest bronze statue that you know exists? Okay, there's a collector in Tamil Nadu who claims he has a bronze statue, and he showed it to me, which belongs to the Satavahana period. Is that possible?
Yes. There are some Shatavahana bronzes, but they're very different. So you've got a piece that's about half the size of this and about this high, and it's elephant with riders on it, very similar to the capitals that you see in caves like Karla, Bhaja, Bedsa. So, but those are, so metal working as such was known, but sacred images are of a very much later date.
The second question I had was, Chola bronzes are exceptional. So what is it about their casting process that makes them so pretty?
Everything is done in wax, and wax is a soft enough medium, I think, to give every single detail. And then that's covered with clay and baked, so the wax melts. And then into that, but it creates a perfect mold of that wax image. And then molten metal is poured into that clay image. And in order to release the metal image, you've got to take hammers and break the mold. And this is one of the things. There is no replica possible. In every other part of the world, Greek and Roman bronzes, Renaissance bronzes, modern Rodin bronzes, it's meant for replication, the whole process, and they're all hollow. By contrast, the Indian bronzes created in wax allows of immense manipulation and detail, and every bronze is a unique bronze. There cannot be a replica. If a image is admired greatly, the wax artist will sit down and do it all over again, and then it'll melt and the mold will be broken, and it'll be very similar, but it cannot be an exact copy.
Thank you so much, Professor. This was very unique, very interesting. I hope all of you will agree with me. May I request Ambassador to say a few words, please?
I wanted to thank Professor Vidya Dehejia for being with us at the embassy and for this fascinating lecture. She also did us proud with a series of lectures at the Mellon Lectures at the National Gallery of Art, and I had the privilege of attending 2 of them, and I share the thoughts of the gentleman here that Washington Post should have added a couple of more times. And to bring in a personal element, you referred to the return of the yogini, and I can tell you that this particular statue was returned by a collector in France when he passed away, and he had of course got it from a smuggler. When he passed away, his widow gave it to the embassy. And as the ambassador there, I had the privilege to return it to the government of India. But the interesting aspect is that we had to prove to the French authorities
that this was indeed Indian sculpture and statue. And among the evidence we presented was the work you had done. So I want to thank you once again for your courage, your dedication, and the work that you have done and you continue to do. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for a wonderful evening. Please join us for the refreshments on this side. Thank you.